use and or view at your own risk. And remember, kids, sometimes the only way forward is to back up. The Windows 7 Firewall is the focus of this video. I will attempt to explain to you what it is, how to configure it, and try to give you a better understanding of its attributes or lack of, as the case may be. Before I get started, I'd like to apologize for the lack of screen annotations that usually accompany my videos. This particular subject would make it difficult, if not impossible, to annotate all the necessary information on screen. I usually do that for any hearing impaired viewers I may have so that they, of course, can use the videos too. I'd also like to apologize for my extreme southern French accent. If you don't speak hick, you may want to seek out your local hillbilly or redneck and ask them to translate for you. What is a firewall? A firewall is a software program or hardware device that restricts or allows traffic on a network. The main reasons for a firewall are security and restriction of use. A firewall controls access to a network by restricting or allowing traffic by rules, or what's commonly referred to as rules. These rules can be based on ports, protocols, encryption, authorization, network adapters, applications, IP address, a range of IP addresses, and policies. Windows Firewall. I'll give you a little history on Windows Firewall. Windows did not ship with a firewall until Windows XP. The Windows XP firewall only allowed you to restrict inbound access, starting with Windows Vista. They implemented what was known as policies. You could have different policies, say a public policy for the Internet, a private policy for any private networks that may also be attached to the computer at the same time, but you could only have one policy enabled at a time, and that would be the most restrictive policy, that usually being the public network policy. Starting with Windows 7, you could have multiple network adapters attached to your computer and multiple policies running at the same time. So I could have two network adapters, as I do on this computer, one going out to the Internet with a public Windows Firewall policy, one going to my internal network with a private Windows Firewall policy. That's much more robust and it makes things a lot nicer. Let's take a look at the Windows 7 Firewall. Go to the Start button, click it, then go to the Start menu, Control Panel shortcut, click it. Now, depending on your control panel view, whether you're viewing by category or icon, you'll need to go to two different places. If you're viewing your control panel by category, you will go to System and Security first, click it, then Windows Firewall. This will take you to the Windows Firewall interface. We'll back up. We will change our control panel view to large icon, and you'll see now that you can drill straight down to the Windows Firewall icon and access the Windows Firewall interface through it. The first thing you'll notice on the right hand pane when you're looking at the Windows Firewall interface is it will show you what policies and which adapters they pertain to are active on any particular computer. On this computer, I have two network adapters and two policies. The home or work, or what's commonly known as the private network firewall policy, and the public network firewall policy. If you'll go to the left-hand pane, the first heading you see will be Allow a Program or Feature through Windows Firewall. We'll click it, let you get an idea of what it looks like. These are some of the default rules. Just a general overview of that. Now we'll go back to the main Windows Firewall interface. We'll minimize it. Most people's first interaction with the firewall will be through a Windows security alert when a program or a feature asks for permission for incoming communication through the firewall. As an example, I'm going to use Hydra IRC. I know that Hydra IRC will ask for incoming communication, and this will give you an idea of the Windows security alert that you'll be seeing. As you can see, Windows security alert has popped up. Windows Firewall has blocked some features of this program. Windows Firewall has blocked some features of Hydra IRC on all public and private networks. The name of the program is Hydra IRC. The publisher is Hydra Productions. Now, if you do not see a publisher here, be extremely wary. Most malware authors do not fill in this particular area, and most legitimate programs do. You'll also see beneath it the path to the executable that we are actually going to allow or disallow. Now, if you'll go back to the very first heading, you'll see that Windows Firewall has blocked some features of Hydra IRC on all public and private networks. If you'll go down to the next heading, allow Hydra IRC to communicate on these networks, and you have two choices because I have two networks attached to this computer and two network profiles or Windows Firewall profiles, and only one of them is checked. It also happens to be the one that Hydra IRC would not be communicating through. So just be aware that Windows can be kind of quirky sometimes. I am not going to allow inbound communication for Hydra IRC. So I'm going to uncheck private networks, public networks. The public network profile was already unchecked, and I'm going to select cancel. We're not going to worry about Hydra IRC, as we were just using it as an example, and we'll close this out now. Now, we will go back to the Windows 7 Firewall interface. We'll go to the left-hand pane. We will look at Allow a Program or Feature through Windows Firewall. We'll click it. Now, when this interface comes up, if we drill down a little bit here, you will see a new entry has become available for Hydra IRC. It is deselected, so it should not be allowed through the firewall, and it also pertains to both of my Windows Firewall profiles, both the private profile and the public profile. If you need to change any of these settings, you can, of course, go to the button up here to change settings, click Change Settings, and now these entries will become available for removal, or you can simply select one and then select Details, and it will give you a little bit of information about it. If you want to allow a program inbound access through the firewall and you did not see a Windows security alert for that program, you can do so by clicking Allow Another Program. You will have a minimal list of programs that are already in it, or you can browse to the particular program. Program files. Since we're using Hydra IRC for our example, we'll stick with that, and you could select the Hydra IRC executable. We're not going to do that since there's already an entry for it, and I don't want to confuse you. So we'll cancel that out here. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to show you, we'll back out, the entry that Hydra IRC made under the advanced settings to give you a better idea of what will go on when that Windows security alert pops up at you. So click Advanced Settings, and remember the communication that Hydra IRC was asking for was inbound, so we're going to go to Inbound Rules, and you will see two entries for Hydra IRC. We'll click these headings, get them where you can better see things. Now, as you may have noticed, under the Windows Firewall Advanced Security interface, you have several headings. You have the actual name of the rule, which is Hydra RC, the profiles, private and public, which it applies to, whether it is or isn't enabled, is enabled, the action to be taken, which is blocked, whether it is or isn't overridden, the path to the executable, and several other things that we'll get into in just a little bit, and hopefully you'll understand them after we do. Now, a little bit about overriding rules. The only rules that can be overridden are inbound rules. Now, we'll go ahead and close this interface. We'll go to Change Notification Settings, and you'll see here that you can customize the settings for each type of network. You can modify firewall settings for each type of the network location that you use. Here is where you can override inbound communication rules only. If you select block all incoming connections, including those in the list of allowed programs, Hydra RC we have blocked, but if we had allowed it, if we selected block all incoming connections, that would effectively override any allowed incoming profile rules. So just be aware of that. We'll go back. We will go back to our first heading, allow a programmer feature through Windows Firewall. Now we'll drill down and we will look at file and printer sharing. Now you'll notice that file and printer sharing is not selected, and it does not apply to any of my Windows Firewall profiles. There's a reason for this. We're going to look at that now. Before we do, I want to show you what it looks like in the advanced settings. We'll go to inbound rules. You can use inbound or outbound, it doesn't really matter. But you'll see file and printer sharing is grayed out. Okay? Double click it and you'll see that it's not enabled. There's a reason it's not enabled, and that was the same reason that it wasn't checked in the minimal Windows Firewall interface that we had just come from. We'll look at outbound rules. We'll also see that the file and printer sharing rules are all. Any rule that pertains to file and printer sharing have been disabled. We'll go ahead and close that. We'll back all the way out to the control panel. We'll go to Network Sharing Center, and we'll go to Change Advanced Sharing Settings. We will see our two Windows Firewall profiles, Home or Work, which is more commonly known as private, and public. We will click the button and drop down, opening up the selections. We will look and we'll see that file and printer sharing has been turned off. This is why the rules are grayed out under the advanced, and why neither profile has been selected in the minimal Windows Firewall interface. So just to show you what it would be like if it was on, we're going to turn it on. We're going to select Save Changes. We will go back to Change Advanced Sharing Settings. We will go to the public profile. We will not turn on file and printer sharing, so that you can start to get an idea of differentiating between profiles. And I'll show you what I mean now. Go back, and we'll go back to the control panel. We'll go back to the Windows Firewall interface. We will go to allow a programmer feature through a Windows Firewall, which is what I'm calling the minimal Windows Firewall interface. We will drill down. You will now notice that file and printer sharing is selected, and only the private Windows Firewall profile is selected. The public one is not selected. Back out, go to Advanced Settings, expand this so you can see things a little better. We'll click Inbound Rules, but it doesn't matter. Expand these headings so you can see. Now, we will go down. Now you will see that any rule that pertains to the private Windows Firewall profile has been enabled, and whatever the default setting was, whether it was allow or block, is also enabled with the rule. You will see the file and printer sharing rules for the public network are still disabled. So what I'm trying to do is get you to understand that you can have two rules, the exact same rules, but pertaining to different Windows Firewall profiles. That's very important, and that is the main upgraded feature for the Windows 7 Firewall. So we'll go back out. We'll close this particular interface. Now, we've already seen what change notification settings does. This is where we could block all incoming connections and override any inbound rule that we have allowed. We'll go back. The next selection in the left-hand pane is turn Windows Firewall on and off. This takes you to the very same interface that we just left from. Now, why it's redundant like that, I really don't know, but of course it allows you to turn the Windows Firewall off or on depending on its current position. Unless you have a third-party firewall, I would never recommend turning off the firewall for either network adapter. So we'll back out. Restore defaults. If I've made a bunch of firewall rules and for some reason one of my programs aren't able to communicate through the firewall, be that inbound or outbound, you can click Restore Defaults and it will restore the default firewall settings for any and all profiles. We'll do this a little later. We're going to go back to the advanced settings and get into the meat and potatoes of it and start creating some rules. Click Advanced Settings. We'll minimize the main interface. When you first see the Windows Firewall with Advanced Security interface, it will show you or give you an overview of all the profiles that comes with the Windows 7 Firewall. You have a domain profile, a private profile, and a public profile. A domain profile usually pertains to a workstation that's connected to a mainframe, or maybe if you're connecting between endpoints or network to network using IPsec. That would be more of your domain profile. A private profile is usually a private, non-routable address that's behind a NATed firewall, usually a hardware firewall. A public address is usually a profile that has internet access but is not behind, but may be behind a NATed firewall. So let's say you're at a coffee shop or at the airport. You want to use the public profile. It's the most restrictive because you don't know whether you're behind a NATed firewall or not. You know, you're just picking up the internet, so this is the most safe, this is the most restrictive. It will also tell you if there are any authenticated communication between computers, and you'll look down here, it just gives you another way of viewing and creating rules, and then you'll keep scrolling down. You'll see view current firewall and IPsec policies and activity, okay, which is basically monitoring, the same thing we got here. You can drop them, you can expand the monitoring, click firewall, and it will show you all rules that are in effect. So let's create a rule. We'll click inbound. Now there may be several reasons to create a rule, be it inbound or outbound. You may want to allow a certain IP address. You may want to block a certain IP address. You may want to allow a certain port. You may want to block a certain port. You may want to allow a certain protocol, or again block a certain protocol. So we are going to give you a general overview. Let's say I want to block any and all communication coming from this particular Chinese IP, or actually range of IPs, to my computer. Let's say if we got a Chinese hacker on us and we know that the danger is coming from this address or this range of addresses, we can block them. So let's do that. We'll select new rule, and you'll see the heading, it says new inbound rule wizard. We are going to block IPs, or actually a range of IPs. So we're going to select custom, select next. We are not blocking a program, so this rule will pertain to all programs and services. We are not blocking any particular protocol, so our protocol type will be any, our local port will be all ports, our remote port will be all ports, and therefore there'd be no reason to customize the ICMP settings. Select next. Now, which local IP addresses does this rule apply to? Well, we're blocking incoming traffic, so it's going to apply to any and all IP addresses. Being this is incoming traffic, and we're going to select a range of IPs, we will select these IP addresses. We'll click add. We're not just going to block one IP address. If we were going to block just one IP, we could just select the very first IP address, click it here, and continue. We're going to block a range of IP addresses. So we're going to block 1.0.1.02, 1.0.3.255. So that's basically that whole range of IP addresses from 1.01 all the way to 1.03. Click OK. Now you'll see that the IP addresses have shown up in the box. We'll click Next. What's the rule that we want to apply? Do we want to allow the inbound connection? Do we want to allow the inbound connection if it's secure, or do we want to block it? Well, we want to block it. Click Next. Which Windows Firewall 7 profiles does it apply to? Well, we don't want any communication coming from this particular range of IP addresses because we think they're hackers, or we're going to block it on all Windows 7 firewall profiles. So they're all checked. We'll leave it the way it is. Click Next. Now you want to name it. We'll name it China. Hacker P range. We will go back to my little note, my little cheat sheet. Under description, click known hacker, more properly termed cracker, with that, known hacker IP range. We'll click finish. This out of the way. Now you can see our rule. So that any communication coming into our computer, no matter what the network adapter is or the Windows 7 firewall profile is, will be blocked from this range of addresses. Okay, so let's see here. Now we're going to add another rule. New rule. This time we are going to add a port rule. Click next. Now, what protocol does this rule apply to? TCP or UDP? And which ports or port does it apply to? Well, the example we're going to use here is the Sub7 virus, and we can see by my little cheat sheet here that Sub7 virus most common ports are TCP ports 6711, 6776, 1234, and port 1999. So we will say 6711 and comma, because we're going to use multiple ports, a space after the first port, 6776. We'll paste that in there, comma, space. We want port 1234. Put that one in there, comma, space. Syntax is important. So you want to put a comma after it and a space before the next entry. And now, this rule is going to block transmission control protocol for the specific ports on my machine of 6711, 6776, 1234, and 1999. We'll click next. Now, do we want to allow the connection? Do we allow the connection to be secure? Of course, in Sub7 we want to block it. Click next. Which Windows Firewall profiles does this apply to? It applies to all of them. Next, name it. Sub7 virus ports, and you could just leave it at that. If you wanted to put a description down here, you could come back in, copy this, clean it up a little bit. May seem a little anal to put a description in such a verbose mode, but you'll see why that can come in really handy later when you're scanning through your rules and you want to see what they are. And you know, some rules you may want to open up or allow for a short period of time, and we'll see why in a little while. So here we'll click finish. Now you'll see our new rule, Sub7 virus ports. We can double click it, open it up, description, it's enabled, it's blocked, we know the scope of it, any IP address, remote or local, and this particular rule has to do with ports and protocols, protocols TCP, and the specific ports are, as we already know, 6711, 6776, 1234, and 1999. So we'll hit OK. Now, the next type of rule we're going to look at is blocking a protocol, an entire protocol. So you can see our protocols and their numbers, and you'll see why their numbers are important in just a second. But you have ICMP ICMP protocol, or Internet Control Message Protocol, Transmission Control Protocol, User Datagram Protocol, on and on and on. Let's see a particular protocol that I know I'm never going to use, so I'm going to block Internet Group Management Protocol. Protocol number is 88. So we'll minimize this. Now, some rules in order to effectively block traffic, you'll need to block both incoming and outgoing. So we'll do that with this one. New rule. Program, port, predefined or custom. We'll go down to custom. Select next. What does this rule apply to? Applies to all programs. Which services does it apply to? It applies to all services. What protocol type does it apply to? It applies to Internet Group Management Protocol. Okay. And actually it's saying that its protocol number is 2. We'll go back and check our cheat sheet. And honestly, I guess our cheat sheet's wrong. So we will go with what the firewall says. What ports does this pertain to? All ports. It's a protocol. So no matter what port this protocol tries to come in on, it's going to be blocked. So we'll select next. Which IP addresses, local and remote, does this apply to? All. Do we want to allow it? We want to block it. Select next. Which Windows Firewall profiles does it pertain to? All. Click next. We want to name it. Would be IGMP. And we select finish. Now this will block the protocol, Internet Group Management Protocol, from inbound traffic. And we will select outbound rules. We will select new rule. We will go down to custom. Next. All programs. Protocol type. IGMP. Next. IP addresses it applies to. All. Next. We want to block it. Next. Windows Firewall profiles it applies to. All. Next. Name. IGMP. And finish. Now we have effectively blocked Internet Group Management Protocol from either calling out of our computer, or if we'll look at the inbound rules, from calling into our computer. So if any Internet Group Management Protocol tries to come into our computer unsolicited, it'll be blocked. If we try to use any Internet Group Management Protocol going out of our computer, it will also be blocked. We'll go back to inbound rules, and we will add a new rule, and this time we will choose the default program. Select next. Of course, if you click all programs, you're going to block all programs from receiving inbound traffic. We're only going to block one specific program, so we'll click the browse button. Go to C, program files, Firefox, select that folder. We will look for the Firefox exe or executable. We'll select it. Now you can see that it's been entered into the box. Click next. Do we want to allow this connection, allow it secure, or block the connection? Well, this is an inbound rule. Not all programs require inbound communication to work. Firefox would be one of these. If you were running a Java applet or something like that underneath Firefox, it may require inbound communication. I don't usually do anything like that, so we're going to block it. We'll select next. Which Windows Firewall profiles does this apply to? All. We'll leave that as it is. name of the rule, Firefox, and the description would be web browser. Now this blocks any unsolicited inbound communication through the program Firefox from making it through our firewall. We'll click Outbound Rules. We'll select a new rule. We're going to create the exact same rule, only pertaining to outbound communication, and I'll show you why in a minute. We'll select Next. Program path, browse, takes us back to our last entry. We'll select the Firefox exe. Next. Do we want to block it or allow it? We are actually going to allow this connection. Select Next. Which Windows Firewall profiles does it pertain to? All of them. Name, Firefox, description again, web browser, and select Finish. Now those are pretty much all of the rules that most people will ever need to use. So we're going to show you how using an outbound rule can help protect your computer, say if you're on a public network. So right now Firefox is allowed. We'll minimize this. We'll bring up Firefox. We'll surf to any old page. We can now see that of course it was allowed. We'll go back to our firewall rules. We'll double click Firefox. The Firefox rule. We will select block connection, select OK. See now outbound communication for Firefox is being blocked. We'll minimize this interface. We'll go to another place and you'll see that it's unable to connect. Go back to our firewall rules. We'll re-enable outbound traffic. And now it's able to connect again. So with that you can see why outbound rules can be very important if you're on a public network. If you're under your domain profile with your domain network, or on a private network with your private profile, not as important because usually, like I said before, domains don't even have internet access, and a private network is usually denotes that it's behind a hardware, a network address translation firewall. A public Windows 7 firewall profile is usually used for coffee shops, airport, and things such as that. Now we'll go down to the next heading in the very left hand pane, which is monitoring. It will show you what profiles are active. We can see the private profile is active and it is on network 7, and the public profile is active. It is on network 3. Of course, you can go down. You can view active firewall rules, view active connections. Now this would be if you're running under IPsec. Of course, we've already looked at firewall under monitoring, and it shows you all firewall rules for all profiles, be they inbound, be they outbound. The connection security rules. This deals with IPsec, just as we just saw just a second ago, and authentication. And that'll pretty much do that. Security associations also deals with IPsec and domain or authorized use. So we'll move over to the far right hand pane. Excuse me, we'll go back to Windows Firewall with Advanced Security on Local Computer. We will go to the very far right hand pane. We'll select Properties. This brings up what I'll refer to as the Windows Firewall control panel. Of course, you can see right here it tells you whether the state of your firewall, whether it's on or off, inbound connections, whether they're blocked or allowed by default, okay, or they're overridden, block all connections. We saw another place where we could do that earlier. Outbound connections are allowed by default, or here you can change that to have them blocked by default. Come down here and specify settings that control Windows Firewall behavior. Click Customize. You can display a notification, which is default, so that anytime anything asks for inbound connections, you can see here, will it display a Windows security alert? Yes, it will. And then you have unicast response, allow unicast response to multicast or broadcast network traffic, allow unicast response yes or no. So we'll leave that there. Here is something that most people may want to use. It's a logging for any and all profiles. Of course, the profile we're under right now is domain profile, which is not connected to this computer. We'll click Customize. Logging drop packets is set to no by default. If I've blocked a program or a port or a range of IPs, be they outbound or inbound, I can change my logging to yes, and every time that program, port, or range of IPs or IP address is hit and it drops the packet because there's a rule for it, the log will create an entry. Logs to successful connections, the same thing. If I have Firefox set to be allowed in or out, and I use it and it makes a successful connection and I want to log that, I can change this to log successful connections yes, and every time Firefox makes a successful connection, it'll be logged. This shows you where your log is actually kept and the name of the log. The name of the log is pfirewall.log. This is the maximum size your log can be, which is 4,096 kilobytes. So we'll cancel out of that. We'll see we have the same selection for every profile on the computer, whether it is active or not. The domain profile is not active. The private and public profiles are active. And this is your IP settings, or your IP security settings. And if you understand that, you probably don't need this video. Click OK. OK. We'll go back to Windows Firewall with Advanced Security on Local Computers. Click it. Now, here we can import policies, export policies, or restore default. If we'll minimize this and go back to our main Windows 7 Firewall interface, you can also restore defaults from there. So we're going to go ahead and stay in the advanced interface. Now we have created all these rules, both inbound and outbound. Click Windows Firewall with Advanced Security. Select Action. Select Export Policy. Sure we're on the desktop. We'll name it Backed Up Firewall Rules. And we will export our entire Windows 7 Firewall rules. All policies, all rules. We can see that our policy was successfully exported. Now, why is that important? We can go back to Action and say that we've created a bunch of rules and there's a program that we have to have access to the network for, be it the public network or the private network, and we're sure that one of the rules is blocking it. We just don't know why, or for whatever number of reasons you may want to restore the default firewall policy. You can come right under Action and select Restore Default Policy. It'll ask you, do you want it to continue? It reminds you that you may want to export your current rules. We've already done that, so we do want to continue. Default policy was restored successfully. Select OK. Now if we'll go underneath Monitor and click Firewall, which will view both inbound and outbound rules, you will now see that all of the active default rules have now been restored. We'll click Inbound Rules. You won't see any of the rules we made. File and printer sharing has been turned back off. Everything has been set to as it was the first time you turned your computer on. The outbound rules the same way. Now you can go ahead and see, you can even use this to troubleshoot. You can see if the program that you were trying to use across one of your networks was being blocked by a rule. If so, this may help you understand which rule it was and go in and adjust it once we restore the firewall rules that we created. So that's what we're going to do now. We'll go back to Action. We'll select Windows Firewall with Advanced Security on local computer, then Action, and then we're going to import a policy. Importing a policy will overwrite all of the current Windows Firewall with Advanced Security policy. If you wish to save a copy of these settings, you should first export the current policy. We don't need to do that. Do you want to import a policy now? Yes, we do. Now it's automatically gone to our desktop, and here is the backed up firewall rules that we had just backed up earlier. We'll select them. Importing policy. Policy was successfully imported. Windows 7 firewall profiles and policy are generally the same things. While they call them a policy in one area and profiles in another, that's Microsoft. Select OK. Now we'll go back to inbound rules or outbound rules. We'll see the rules we made are there. We can come up underneath monitoring, which will show us, select firewall, which will show us all the rules, and we'll see all our rules have now been restored. Well, that should just about do you. Thank you for watching.